The Christmas message arrived at exactly 8:14 on a Tuesday night. I remember the time because I had just finished wrapping my daughter's last present while my son sat on the living room floor trying to convince our golden retriever that reindeer could probably fly if they believed hard enough. My phone buzzed. I smiled before I even looked at it. Every year my mother sent the same group message. Dinner at 4. Hot chocolate by the fireplace. Dad carving the turkey, even though everyone preferred ham. My brother showing up late with some excuse. The kids tearing through wrapping paper while Bing Crosby played in the background. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. I opened the message expecting another familiar tradition. Instead, I read words that made my hands go completely still. This year, we've decided Christmas will be adults only. I frowned. That didn't make any sense. My parents had built Christmas around grandchildren. My mother started buying gifts in July. My father spent 2 weekends every December hanging lights that half the neighborhood came to admire. Adults only? Then another message appeared. Please don't bring Emma or Noah. Claire feels the holidays should be a more elegant gathering, and children create too much chaos. Claire, my brother Ethan's girlfriend. She'd been dating him for 8 months. 8 months. And somehow, my own children who had spent every Christmas in that house since they were born were suddenly the problem. I read the message 3 times, hoping I'd misunderstood it. I hadn't. My 6-year-old daughter looked up at me with tape stuck to one hand. Mom? I realized I'd stopped breathing. Grandma texted. She knew that smile, the one I always had whenever Grandma made plans. This time, I couldn't smile. I quietly locked my phone and set it face down on the kitchen counter. Sweetheart, I said softly, why don't you keep wrapping Teddy's present? I'll be right back. I walked into the laundry room and closed the door behind me. Not because I wanted privacy, because I didn't want my children watching me fall apart over something they weren't old enough to understand. For a full minute, I simply stared at the washing machine. Then another text arrived. This one from my father. We're asking everyone to respect the atmosphere Claire is trying to create. Respect the atmosphere. I whispered those words out loud, as if hearing them would somehow make them less absurd. The atmosphere. Not my children. Not the grandchildren they'd once called their greatest blessing. The atmosphere. I should have been angry. Instead, I felt something quieter, something heavier, like discovering a crack in the foundation of a house you'd trusted your entire life. And once you see a crack, you start wondering how long it's been there. Welcome back to Reality Drama Story, where family secrets unfold and quiet decisions change everything. If you're new here, drop a comment and subscribe. Now, let me tell you how one Christmas invitation revealed a betrayal that had been carefully built for years. Because this story didn't begin with a text message. It began long before Claire ever walked into our family. When I was little, Christmas meant my father standing on a ladder pretending he didn't need anyone to hold it, while my mother yelled that he was going to break his neck. My brother Ethan and I would laugh from the yard, wrapped in oversized scarves our grandmother knitted by hand. Grandma Ruth believed every family was like a house. If you ignore one loose beam, she'd say, eventually the roof doesn't know who it's supposed to protect. At 8 years old, I thought she was talking about carpentry. Years later, I understood she was talking about people. Grandma never played favorites. If she baked 12 cookies, Ethan got 6. I got 6. If one grandchild received a birthday card with $20 tucked inside, so did the other. Fairness wasn't something she preached. It was something she practiced. After she passed away, everything changed so slowly that none of us noticed. Dad retired. Mom started caring more about appearances than traditions. Family dinners became carefully planned events instead of loud, joyful evenings. Nothing dramatic happened, just tiny adjustments. Like someone sanding away a piece of furniture one layer at a time until it no longer resembled what you'd inherited. Ethan always chased success. He wanted bigger houses, better cars, exclusive neighborhoods. I never blamed him for that. People dream differently. I married Daniel, a high school history teacher. We bought a modest 3-bedroom home built in 1989 with squeaky hardwood floors and a front porch that leaned just enough to make visitors notice. We couldn't afford perfection, but our house was always full. Kids from the neighborhood wandered in after school. Daniel grilled burgers almost every Saturday. Someone was always laughing. Someone was always making too much noise. Apparently, that noise would eventually become a problem. The first time I met Claire, she arrived exactly 23 minutes late for Sunday dinner. Not rushed, calculated, like making an entrance mattered more than being present. She wore a cream-colored cashmere coat that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. She kissed my mother's cheek, shook my father's hand, then looked around the dining room with the careful eyes of someone inspecting a hotel before checking in. She smiled. Oh, just one word. Oh, it wasn't what she said. It was what she didn't. She didn't compliment Mom's cooking. She didn't ask about family traditions. She didn't introduce herself to my children first. Instead, she noticed fingerprints on the sliding glass door. I suppose children make cleaning challenging. She laughed softly. Nobody else did. I caught Mom forcing a smile. Dad cleared his throat. Daniel quietly changed the subject. I assumed Claire was nervous. People deserve grace on first impressions. Looking back, that was probably my first mistake. Over the following months, Claire never demanded attention. She didn't need to. She influenced people the way water changes stone. Slowly, patiently, almost invisibly. She complimented expensive restaurants. Soon, Mom stopped suggesting our usual neighborhood diner. She admired quiet evenings. Suddenly, game nights disappeared. She mentioned that formal table settings felt more sophisticated. Within weeks, paper snowflakes made by my children no longer decorated my parents' windows during holidays. Everything became cleaner, quieter, more polished. Less us. At first, I convinced myself I was imagining it. Families evolve. People change. That's normal. But then my daughter Emma asked a question I couldn't answer. Mom, why doesn't Grandma put our Christmas ornaments on her tree anymore? I froze. Every year since Emma was 3, she'd made a handmade ornament for Grandma. Construction paper. Woo. Too much glitter. Crooked stars. Little handprints covered in paint. I hadn't even noticed they were gone. The elegant silver ornaments had replaced them. Beautiful. Perfect. And strangely empty. That night, after the kids were asleep, Daniel found me sitting at the kitchen table staring at an old family photo. "What are you looking for?" he asked. I didn't answer immediately. Finally, I whispered, "I'm trying to figure out when we stopped belonging." Before he could respond, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't my mother. It wasn't my father. It was a message from someone I never expected. And the first sentence changed everything. "You need to know why Claire really doesn't want your children there." I stared at the message for several seconds before I even thought about replying. It came from Linda, my mother's younger sister. My aunt wasn't dramatic. She never gossiped. In fact, she usually stayed out of family disagreements completely. If she was reaching out this late at night, something had happened. I typed only 2 words. What happened? The typing bubble appeared almost immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, her reply came. "Can you meet me tomorrow morning? Not at your parents' house." That was all. No explanation. No details. Just enough to make sleep impossible. The next morning, I dropped Emma and Noah off at school before driving to a small cafe about 15 minutes from Aunt Linda's neighborhood. She was already there. A mug of untouched coffee sat in front of her. She looked tired, older than I remembered. As soon as I sat down, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "For what?" "For what's been happening to you." I frowned. "I honestly don't know what's happening." Linda took a slow breath. "You've noticed your parents changing." It wasn't a question. I nodded. "They've become different." She looked toward the cafe window before speaking again. "No, they've become influenced." There was a difference. I felt it immediately. "Claire?" Linda nodded once. But she didn't start with Christmas. According to Aunt Linda, it had begun only a few weeks after Claire started dating Ethan. Nothing obvious. Nothing anyone could point to. Just conversations. Suggestions. Little comments disguised as compliments. "Your house is beautiful, but it feels so busy." Children really do change the energy of a room. Some families outgrow certain traditions. Successful people usually celebrate differently. Little seeds, one at a time, until they became beliefs. Linda stirred her coffee, even though she'd never added sugar. I kept hoping your mother would notice. She didn't? No. She thought Claire was helping. Helping. That word settled heavily in my chest. Looking back, I realized there had been warning signs. Last Easter, my mother suddenly insisted everyone wear neutral colors for family photos. Emma had picked out a bright yellow dress she'd been excited about for weeks. Mom asked her if she had something less distracting. Emma was only 6. She quietly changed into a beige sweater. At Thanksgiving, Noah laughed so hard milk came out of his nose. The entire table used to love moments like that. Dad would have laughed the loudest. Instead, Mom immediately apologized to Claire. I'm so sorry about the mess. Claire smiled politely. It's all right. But her expression said something very different. Children notice more than adults realize. A week after Thanksgiving, Noah climbed into my lap while I was folding laundry. Mom? Yeah, buddy? Did I do something bad at Grandma's? I stopped folding towels. What makes you ask that? He looked down. Grandpa didn't laugh. It broke my heart because he wasn't asking about spilled milk. He was asking why the people who used to adore him suddenly seemed careful around him. Children don't understand social manipulation. They only understand silence. Daniel tried to reassure me. Maybe your parents are just adjusting. I hope you're right. But deep down, I knew adjustment didn't erase handmade ornaments. Adjustment didn't replace grandchildren with atmosphere. Something else was happening. Something deliberate. Aunt Linda reached into her purse. I debated whether to show you this. She unfolded a printed email. I accidentally saw it when your mother asked me to print something. She slid the page toward me. The sender's name made my stomach tighten. Hair. The subject line read, Christmas Vision. I looked at Linda. You read it? She nodded slowly. I wish I hadn't. I began reading. The holiday should reflect elegance and refinement. Children naturally create disorder. Potential business relationships may attend in future years, so it's important to establish the right image now. Business relationships? What business relationships? My parents weren't hosting investors. They were hosting family. I kept reading. Some family members represent the future we want. Then another sentence. Others represent habits we've outgrown. My hands froze. She wasn't talking about decorations. She was talking about us. I looked up. They actually agreed to this? Linda looked away. Not immediately. So what changed? She hesitated, then answered quietly. Claire convinced your mother that Ethan's future depended on fitting into a different social circle. Different. Better. More sophisticated. Apparently families could now be measured like neighborhoods. The irony was impossible to ignore. Daniel and I weren't struggling. We paid our bills. Our mortgage was nearly half paid off. Emma and Noah attended excellent public schools. Daniel coached youth baseball every spring. I volunteered twice a month at the community food pantry. Our life wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. Claire measured success by appearances. We measured it by peace. Apparently, only one of those counted now. A few days later, Ethan called. That alone surprised me. My brother rarely phoned unless he needed something. Hey, he said casually. You got Mom's text? I did. Silence. Then he sighed. Claire didn't mean anything personal. I almost laughed. Banning my children from Christmas feels personal. It's just 1 year. 1 year. Funny how people always describe betrayal as temporary, as though time somehow reduces its weight. Ethan, I asked calmly, did you agree with this? He didn't answer. That silence told me everything. I didn't think you'd make such a big deal out of it. A big deal. I looked around my kitchen. Emma's crayons still covered part of the dining table. Noah's tiny sneakers sat crooked by the back door. Our Christmas tree leaned slightly to the left because we'd never gotten around to fixing the stand. Chaos. Beautiful chaos. I think we're done talking. I hung up before he could respond. That evening, I found Emma sitting beside the Christmas tree. She held a glitter-covered ornament she'd made in kindergarten. Mom? Yes. Can we still make cookies for Grandma? I swallowed hard. Every year they baked together. Chocolate chip, sugar cookies, cinnamon stars. It had become their tradition. I don't know, sweetheart. She nodded quietly. Okay. No tears. No complaints. Sometimes acceptance hurts more than crying. 3 days later, another surprise arrived. A cream-colored envelope. Hand-delivered. No postage. Inside was an invitation. Not from my parents. From Claire. Holiday wine reception. December 22nd. Adults only. Formal attire required. Apparently Christmas had become a networking event. At the bottom, one handwritten sentence caught my attention. I hope you'll understand this is about preserving standards, not excluding anyone. Preserving standards. I read it twice. Then a third time. Daniel looked over my shoulder. She actually wrote that? I nodded. He shook his head slowly. I've taught history for 18 years. What does that have to do with this? He looked at the invitation. Every generation invents new words to justify treating people like they matter less. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I walked into the garage looking for wrapping paper. Instead, I found an old storage bin labeled Grandma Ruth. Inside were photo albums, Christmas decorations, old letters tied together with faded blue ribbon. As I lifted the box, a small envelope slipped onto the floor. It wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to my mother. The envelope had never been opened, and written in Grandma Ruth's unmistakable handwriting were 6 words that made my heart race. Open only if the family changes. I stood frozen in the dim garage light, the envelope trembling in my hands. What could Grandma have known? And why had my mother never opened it? I had no idea. But I was beginning to realize this Christmas wasn't just about an invitation. It was about a family secret that had been waiting years to be uncovered. I held the unopened envelope for nearly a full minute. The paper had yellowed around the edges, and Grandma Ruth's handwriting was instantly recognizable, steady, careful, the kind of handwriting that came from someone who never rushed important things. On the front she had written, "For Margaret, open only if the family changes in a way that forgets what made it a family." Margaret, my mother's name. She had never opened it. I knew I should have put it back. It wasn't addressed to me. But I also knew something else. If Grandma had gone through the trouble of writing those words nearly 12 years earlier, she had seen something the rest of us hadn't. I called Aunt Linda. I found something. What is it? I told her exactly what was written on the envelope. There was a long silence. Finally she said, "Don't open it alone." The next afternoon, Aunt Linda came over after the kids were at school. We sat at my kitchen table. The same table where Emma painted pictures. The same table where Noah practiced spelling words. It suddenly felt like a courtroom. Linda looked at the envelope. "I remember your grandmother writing letters during her last winter." "You knew?" "I knew she was writing them." "You never asked?" She shook her head. "Some people don't write letters to explain the past. They write them to protect the future." Carefully, I slid one finger beneath the old seal. The envelope opened with almost no resistance. Inside was a folded letter and one additional document. I unfolded the letter first. Grandma's words felt as though she were sitting across from us. "If this letter has been opened, then the family has probably begun confusing appearances with character." I stopped reading. Linda quietly wiped away a tear. I continued. "A beautiful house can still have a weak foundation. Never mistake polished floors for strong beams." That sounded exactly like her. She always spoke in the language of homes and foundations. Then came the sentence that changed everything. "The cabin belongs to the grandchildren who keep this family together, not to the child who simply wants to own it." I looked up. "The cabin?" Linda nodded slowly. "I was wondering when you'd reach that part." The family cabin. A small lake house in northern Michigan. Nothing luxurious. 2 bedrooms. 1 fireplace. A dock that Dad rebuilt almost every summer. Every Christmas morning since I was 9, we'd driven there for hot chocolate before heading home for dinner. To us, it wasn't property. It was memory. I frowned. I thought Mom and Dad owned it. They do. Then what is Grandma talking about? Linda pushed the second document toward me. It wasn't a letter. It was a copy of a legal amendment, signed by Grandma Ruth, dated March 14, 2014. Attached to the family trust. One clause had been highlighted. The lakeside property may not be sold, transferred, or refinanced unless every living grandchild has unrestricted access to it during major family holidays. I read it twice. Then again. Emma, Noah, future grandchildren, all protected. I looked at Linda. Mom knows about this? I believe your father does. And Claire? Linda smiled sadly. I don't think she has any idea. Suddenly, everything began making sense. Claire wasn't just changing Christmas. She was reshaping the family. If the grandchildren stopped coming, if traditions disappeared, if the cabin became an adult retreat instead of a family gathering, eventually someone might argue the restriction no longer mattered. Someone might even try to sell it. I remembered one conversation from 6 months earlier. Claire had stood on the cabin deck looking across the lake. This property could easily be worth over $1 million. Dad had laughed. We've never thought about selling. Claire smiled politely. Everything has the right price. At the time, I thought she was making conversation. Now, I wasn't so sure. 3 days later, my mother called. Her voice sounded unusually cheerful. I wanted to make sure you received Claire's invitation. I did. Wonderful. There was an awkward pause. Then she added, I hope there aren't any hard feelings. I looked around my kitchen. Emma and Noah were building a blanket fort in the living room. Daniel was pretending not to know where they had disappeared. Their laughter echoed through the house. No, I answered quietly. There aren't hard feelings. There was another pause. There are clear ones. She didn't know what to say. Neither did I. December 22nd arrived. The wine reception. Daniel offered to stay home. You don't have to go. I know. But I think I should. Are you going to confront them? I buttoned my navy blue coat. No. What are you going to do? I smiled faintly. I'm going to observe. Grandma always said people reveal themselves when they believe no one is measuring the room. Tonight, I intended to measure everything. My parents' house barely looked familiar. White roses, crystal candle holders, a string quartet playing near the fireplace. The handmade stockings my children had decorated years ago were gone. In their place hung matching ivory stockings embroidered with gold thread. Beautiful. Perfect. Empty. Claire greeted guests near the front door. She wore a dark emerald gown. When she saw me, her smile widened just enough to look practiced. I'm so glad you came. I was curious. About what? Whether this still felt like Christmas. For the first time, her smile faltered. Only slightly. The room filled quickly. Business owners, neighbors, friends of Ethan's, people I barely recognized. Dad introduced Claire 17 times in less than an hour. My son's wonderful girlfriend. My son's wonderful girlfriend. My son's wonderful girlfriend. I counted. 17. Not once did he mention his grandchildren. Not once. Then I noticed something else. Near the fireplace sat a framed architectural rendering. A large drawing. Luxury renovations. Glass walls. Expanded decks. Modern guest suites. Across the bottom was a title. Lakeside Retreat Concept. My heart slowed. Not raised. Slowed. Because suddenly every missing piece fit together. Claire wasn't redesigning Christmas. She was redesigning the future. The family cabin. If this story is hitting close, drop a comment and stay with me, because what happens next is something none of them were ready for. I quietly walked toward the framed drawing. A guest beside me admired it. Beautiful vacation property. It is. Who's buying it? I smiled politely. No one. Behind me, I heard Claire's voice. Actually, we're exploring possibilities. We. Interesting choice of word. She hadn't married Ethan. She owned nothing. Yet somehow, she already spoke as though the family's future belonged to her. I turned slowly. For the first time that evening, our eyes met without either of us pretending. And I realized she still had no idea about Grandma Ruth's legal clause. That was about to change. The room had gone unusually quiet. Not silent, just quiet enough that people began paying attention without realizing they were doing it. Claire stood beside the framed rendering of the lake cabin, one hand resting lightly on the edge of the easel, as if she already owned the future it represented. She smiled at the guests. We've been thinking about creating something more refined. A place that's suitable for executive retreats, private dinners, and networking weekends. Several people nodded politely. Someone commented that the design looked expensive. Claire laughed softly. It will be worth every dollar. I finally spoke. It certainly would be. Every head turned. My voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Calm voices have a way of carrying farther than angry ones. Claire looked at me with the same practiced smile she'd worn all evening. I'm glad you approve. I didn't say I approved. The smile faded. I said it would be expensive. Dad stepped closer. Honey. I looked at him gently. Dad, may I ask one question? He hesitated. Of course. Has everyone here been told that the property can't legally become what she's describing? The room became still. Claire blinked. What are you talking about? I reached into my handbag and removed a neatly folded copy of Grandma Ruth's trust amendment. I think this explains it. I handed it to my father first. His face changed before he'd finished reading the second paragraph. He looked at my mother. You never opened the letter? Mom frowned. What letter? The one from your mother. Her expression emptied. I forgot about it. Forgot. Such a small word. Yet it had nearly cost our family something that couldn't be replaced. I unfolded Grandma Ruth's letter. I found this in her keepsake box. My mother's hands trembled as I placed it in front of her. She read silently. Halfway through, tears filled her eyes. She covered her mouth. Oh, Mom. She whispered it as though Grandma could still hear her. Claire stepped forward. This doesn't change anything. I looked at her. It changes everything. She folded her arms. The cabin belongs to your parents. Yes. They can choose how it's used. Only within the conditions of the trust. She frowned. What conditions? I answered calmly. The property cannot be sold, transferred, refinanced, or converted into an exclusive retreat if doing so removes access from every living grandchild during major family holidays. The attorney standing near the fireplace quietly asked, Is that an enforceable clause? I nodded. It was drafted by a trust attorney and recorded with the amended family trust on March 14, 2014. He extended his hand. May I? I gave him the document. He read for less than 2 minutes. Then looked up. It's valid. No one spoke. Claire stared at him. There has to be a loophole. He shook his head. Not that I can see. For the first time since she'd entered our family, she looked uncertain. Then came anger. This is ridiculous. No one answered. She turned toward Ethan. Say something. My brother looked at the floor. She raised her voice. Ethan. He finally met her eyes. I didn't know. You agreed with me. I agreed because I thought Christmas was just one dinner. His voice cracked. I didn't realize what we were giving away. Claire's frustration became desperation. She looked at my parents. You wanted a different future. My mother slowly shook her head. No, we wanted to feel proud. Claire answered quickly. And I helped you. No. Mom wiped away another tear. You helped me confuse elegance with love. That sentence settled over the room like fresh snow. No one interrupted it. No one could. Then Claire tried something else. Tears. They arrived almost instantly. I've only ever wanted this family to become something special. Aunt Linda, who had quietly arrived 20 minutes earlier, finally spoke. It already was. Everyone turned toward her. She smiled sadly. The problem wasn't noisy children. It was adults who forgot why the noise mattered. No one argued, because everyone knew she was right. My father slowly walked toward the fireplace. He looked at the missing handmade stockings, then at the expensive decorations, then back at me. Emma made us a snowman stocking. She did. And Noah painted Santa with blue boots. I smiled. He insisted reindeer liked blue. Dad laughed. A real laugh. The first one I'd heard from him in months. I packed them away. I know. I don't even remember why. I answered quietly. I think you wanted everything to look perfect. He nodded. And in chasing perfect, I stopped protecting what was precious. My mother came toward me. She didn't defend herself. She didn't make excuses. She simply asked, Will Emma and Noah forgive us? I looked at her for a long moment. They're children. They've been waiting for you to remember them. She cried openly then. Not dramatic tears. The quiet kind. The kind that come when someone finally tells themselves the truth. Claire picked up her purse. This family deserves each other. No one stopped her. She walked to the front door, opened it, paused for just a second, perhaps expecting Ethan to follow. He didn't. The door closed behind her, and with it, the performance ended. Christmas morning arrived 3 days later. At 9:02 a.m., my phone rang. Dad, can you come to the cabin? We weren't invited. You are now. There was another pause. This time, he said quietly, bring the chaos. When we arrived, snow covered the dock. Smoke curled gently from the chimney. Emma and Noah ran toward the porch before I could remind them not to slip. The front door opened. Grandpa was already waiting. He knelt down, opened his arms. Both children crashed into him. He laughed so loudly birds lifted from the nearby pine trees. Grandma stood behind him holding 2 familiar stockings. The glitter-covered snowman, the blue boot Santa. She had repaired them by hand. Tiny stitches lined the edges. Emma noticed immediately. You fixed it. Grandma smiled through tears. I should never have taken it down. Inside the cabin, everything looked familiar again. The old quilt, the slightly crooked wreath, the faded board games. Nothing matched. Everything belonged. After lunch, Dad disappeared into the hallway and returned carrying a small wooden box. He handed it to me. Inside was Grandma Ruth's original letter. Folded neatly beneath, it was another document. Dad smiled. I've already spoken with our attorney. I looked up. He continued. The trust has been updated. I unfolded the papers. A new amendment, signed 2 days earlier. It confirmed that every future Christmas at the cabin would remain open to every grandchild and every direct member of the family. No exceptions. No exclusions. No private conversions. No executive retreats. Just family. Dad looked embarrassed. I needed numbers. He smiled weakly. So here they are. He pointed to the document. The cabin stays protected for another 99 years under the new trust language. 99 years. A strangely comforting number. Long enough for grandchildren I would probably never meet. Long enough for memories to outlive mistakes. That afternoon, Noah accidentally spilled hot chocolate across the dining table. Everyone froze. Then Dad laughed. Looks like Christmas. The room filled with laughter. Real laughter. The kind no decorator could ever manufacture. Later that evening, as the children slept on the couch beneath Grandma's handmade blankets, I stepped onto the porch alone. Snowflakes drifted silently across the frozen lake. Daniel joined me. So, you were right. About what? The house. He smiled. What house? The one Grandma always talked about. I looked back through the cabin window. At my parents. At my children. At the repaired stockings. At Ethan quietly helping Dad wash dishes. Foundations don't collapse all at once. And they aren't rebuilt with speeches. They're rebuilt one careful beam at a time. Sometimes. The strongest repair begins with admitting exactly where the crack started. That Christmas wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was honest. And honesty is strong enough to hold up a family when appearances cannot. If this story reminded you to know your worth, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe, drop a comment, and I will see you in the next one.